Have you ever walked into a room and felt like an alien among your own species? Not because you're strange, not because you're wrong, but because something in you moves at a different frequency. You pick up on things others don't even register. You ask questions no one else dares to voice. You see through the masks everyone else seems content to wear. And while others laugh, chat, and float on the surface of things, you sink into thought, into meaning, into questions without answers. They say you're too much, too intense, too quiet. You speak and suddenly the room goes still. Not because you've offended anyone, but because your words don't fit the script. You challenge the comfortable rhythm of their world, and comfort doesn't like to be challenged. This story begins not in adulthood, but in childhood, in classrooms where laughter echoes, desks creak, and young minds absorb lessons like sponges. You're the same age as the kids around you. You look like them. You talk like them. But inside, you feel different, disconnected, not better, not above, just out of place. While others laugh at jokes you don't find funny, you're staring out the window lost in thought. While they play games and gossip, you're asking yourself, why do people lie so casually? Why does everyone pretend they're okay when they're clearly not? Why does small talk feel like noise instead of music? That's your first taste of the curse, the silent curse of depth. And it isn't the kind of intelligence they reward with medals or report cards. It's the intelligence that sees too much and feels too deeply. The kind that recognizes subtle hypocrisies in conversation. The kind that notices when someone's eyes don't match their smile. The kind that gets exhausted not from doing but from being. As the years pass, you learn to adjust, not because you've changed, but because you've had to. You realize your honesty makes people uncomfortable. Your questions break the illusion they rely on, so you begin to hold back. In conversations, you censor your curiosity. You nod politely instead of probing further. You smile when it's expected, even when it feels like a lie. Because somewhere along the way, you've learned being understood is rare. Being accepted is conditional. And being real, that's the fastest way to be alone. They think you're arrogant, cold, detached. But you're not. You're just tired of having to explain yourself, tired of watching people recoil from your depth like it's a threat. So you build walls, not to keep people out, but to protect your truth from being misunderstood, misjudged, or worse, dismissed. And there lies the cruel paradox. Society says it admires intelligence, but only in theory. In practice, it recoils from it. We celebrate genius from a distance in books, in films, in history. But in everyday life, real raw intelligence is often met with resistance, isolation, even fear. The German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer understood this long before you ever walked into that silent room. He believed that true intelligence, the kind that dares to question, to dig, to see past illusion, is not a blessing, but a burden. Because the smarter you are, the lonelier you become. Why? Because most people aren't looking for truth. They're looking for comfort. And truth by nature is uncomfortable. It strips away the cozy illusions we cling to. It challenges our assumptions. It pierces the veil we call normal. And that's exactly what intelligent people do often without even trying. They question, they analyze, they notice, and in doing so, they threaten the fragile structure most people spend their whole lives building. So the group pushes them away. Schopenhauer called it the herd instinct, a deep, unconscious drive to conform, to blend in, to avoid rocking the boat. It's not stupidity, it's survival. Most people follow the script because stepping off stage is scary. And when someone you refuses to play along, it unsettles the group. You ask questions they've never dared to ask themselves. You highlight contradictions they've trained themselves to ignore. You speak truths they've buried under years of performance. And suddenly you're a problem. You're the one making things awkward. The one who takes things too seriously. The one who overthinks. But what if you're not overthinking? What if you're seeing clearly in a world that thrives on illusion? In classrooms, in offices, in families, and friendships, there's always that invisible rule. Don't think too much. Don't question the script. Don't make things complicated. Just go with the flow. But you never could, and so you adapt. You learn to hide your sharpest thoughts. You practice silence. You lower your volume, your expectations, your hopes. You become a chameleon blending in not because it's who you are, but because it's safer than being rejected again. And still the weight builds. You sit in rooms full of people and feel like a ghost. You smile at parties, but your mind drifts elsewhere to the stars, to the meaning of life, to the memory of something someone said that didn't sit right. You ache not for attention, but for understanding. You crave a connection that goes beyond words. Someone who won't just nod, but get it. Someone who doesn't fear your depth, but meets you in it. But that person never seems to appear. And in that aching silence, you ask the question, is there something wrong with me? But what if the question is wrong? What if your loneliness is not a flaw, but a sign? A signal that your mind is rare, that your thoughts are deep, that your soul is wired differently in a world built for surface. The tragedy is not just that society misunderstands intelligence. It's that it never teaches you how to live with it. Schools teach you how to pass exams. Jobs teach you how to perform. But who teaches you how to exist when your brain feels like a storm? No one. So you figure it out alone. You carry the weight. You question silently. You survive in a world that keeps asking you to be less curious, less intense, less you. But if Schopenhauer was right and centuries of silent, unseen suffering suggest that he was, then your pain is not meaningless. It's evidence, not of brokenness, but of brilliance, not of failure, but of perception. You're not alone. You're just surrounded by people playing a game you never signed up for. And maybe, just maybe, that's not your curse. It's your calling. In the next part of this video, we'll go deeper into what Schopenhauer really meant. We'll examine why intelligent people are both admired and alienated. We'll uncover the social forces that punish those who think too much. And we'll explore how you can survive, even thrive, as someone who sees through the illusion, who doesn't just go along with the herd. Because the truth is, your mind isn't the problem. It might just be the solution. But as we explored before, society claims to admire intelligence until it becomes uncomfortable, until it questions the rules, pierces through illusions, or simply refuses to conform. When you go against the grain, when you question instead of comply, you're not rewarded with admiration. You're labeled strange, too serious, difficult to work with. Take a look at the modern workplace, for example. We celebrate the idea of innovation. We throw around words like creativity and critical thinking in corporate mission statements. But in practice, those who raise inconvenient truths in meetings are often brushed aside, seen as troublemakers rather than trailblazers. The employee who points out inefficiencies isn't applauded for being proactive. They're told to stop overanalyzing. Don't be so negative, they're warned. Just go with the flow. The ones who refuse to take part in office gossip, who choose honesty over hollow smiles, are quietly labeled antisocial. In truth, they're not antisocial, they're simply allergic to pretense. And it doesn't stop there. This pattern starts young. In schools, students who obey every rule without question are rewarded with praise, high grades, and approval. But the ones who dare to ask why too many times, they're called disruptive. Not because their questions are wrong, but because their questions reveal cracks in the system. Because they challenge the authority that thrives on silence, not on understanding. Even in the digital world where we assume free thought flourishes, complexity is quietly punished. The algorithms, the invisible rulers of modern attention, don't reward nuance or intellectual depth. They favor what's quick, emotional, digestible. Repetition wins. Outrage spreads. Simplicity dominates. A thoughtful paragraph is no match for a flashy headline. And slowly the thinkers begin to withdraw. So what happens to the truly intelligent in a world like this? They learn to shrink themselves, to nod politely, to smile when they don't mean it. They build masks, social armor, just to get through the day. They speak half-truths because the whole truth is too heavy for the room. Over time, their brilliance goes quiet. Genius gets buried beneath layers of self-doubt, wrapped in the fear of being misunderstood, or worse, rejected. Society ends up with exactly what it unknowingly demands: silent minds, brilliant but muted, potential that remains untapped, wisdom that dies unspoken, not because it lacked value, but because it lacked an audience willing to receive it. And that is the great irony. The world romanticizes intelligence, but only if it comes dressed in agreeable tones, only if it plays nice, only if it doesn't threaten the status quo. But real intelligence, it's wild, unruly. It resists neat labels. It won't fit into catchy slogans or viral trends. It refuses to stroke fragile egos. Instead, it challenges them. And for that reason, society keeps it at arm's length. To be truly intelligent is not just to see more, it is to feel more, to know more than others are ready to accept. It means sitting in a room where everyone smiles and nods at a comforting lie while you carry the weight of a truth that no one wants to hear. It's not just rejection. It's exile, social, emotional, even existential. Because once you see the game, you can't unsee it. And when you stop playing, you stop belonging. This is the true cost of nonconformity. And for those unwilling to betray their inner clarity, that cost is paid silently every single day. But Schopenhauer believed that this suffering was not meaningless. In fact, he saw it as deeply significant. To him, intelligence was not some grand privilege, it was a burden. A burden that only the strongest could bear without losing themselves. And those who bear it, they walk a lonelier road, but a more authentic one. Arthur Schopenhauer wasn't like other philosophers. He didn't offer hopeful illusions. He didn't sugarcoat suffering or promise joy to those who followed certain principles. He looked life in the eye and called it what it was, suffering. And the more conscious you are, he said, the more deeply you feel that suffering. To some, that might sound bleak. But for those who've spent years feeling too much, thinking too much, seeing too much, it felt like a breath of honesty, like someone finally dared to say what everyone else was too afraid to admit. Schopenhauer was born in 1788 in Germany. Outwardly, he came from wealth, but emotionally, his home was cold. His father, a rigid, rational merchant, his mother, a socialite and writer who later distanced herself from his darker worldview. From early childhood, Schopenhauer felt like he didn't quite belong. He wasn't in life. He was observing it quietly, intensely, like a distant witness watching a stage play he couldn't join. That distance became the heart of his philosophy. His most famous idea: a man can be himself only so long as he is alone. In other words, intelligence inevitably leads to isolation. Not because one chooses to be alone, but because depth alienates. The more you understand life, the less you can relate to those who are just skating across its surface. At the core of Schopenhauer's worldview was the concept of the will, a blind, irrational force that drives all life. It doesn't care about truth or meaning, it just wants relentlessly. Most people, he believed, are slaves to this will. They chase pleasure, power, validation, not from reasoned choice, but from unconscious compulsion. They're stuck in a loop of desire they don't even see. But the truly intelligent begin to notice. They see the trap. And slowly, painfully, they begin to step outside of it. And that's when the suffering really begins. Because once you recognize the world as a theater of illusions powered by cravings, you can't laugh at the same jokes. You can't engage in shallow conversations. You feel like a ghost haunting a party that never ends, wondering why no one else seems to notice the emptiness. Schopenhauer once wrote, "The more unintelligent a man is, the less mysterious existence seems to him." Ignorance, in his view, isn't just bliss, it's belonging. Start asking the big questions about purpose, morality, mortality, and you lose your place in the tribe. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because you've stepped outside the unspoken agreement to not look too deeply. But Schopenhauer didn't despise society. He simply understood its limits. Society entertains, solitude awakens, and the intelligent in time come to crave what society cannot give: silence, authenticity, and depth. To him, solitude was not a punishment, it was a kind of freedom. As he put it, great men are like eagles and build their nest on some lofty solitude. To be intelligent in his eyes was not glamorous. It was a burden that stripped away comfort and forced you into the lonely heights of clear vision. But it was also a chance to live more truthfully, to turn pain into insight, alienation into wisdom, suffering into depth. And perhaps most importantly, to know that if you feel the weight of this world more than most, you're not alone. You're just awake. And so, as we explored in the last chapter, the burden of seeing too clearly, of feeling too deeply, it becomes painfully clear awareness comes at a price. For Schopenhauer, that price was suffering, but not the kind that destroys, rather the kind that sharpens, that sculpts the soul into something more honest. While the world often mocks those who see too much, labeling them overly sensitive, melancholic, or aloof, Schopenhauer's quiet voice emerges from the pages of his philosophy like a whisper to those silently aching. You are not broken. You are just awake. His teachings never promised escape or solutions. They were not about fixing life. They were about enduring it without illusion, without self-deception. He invited us to stand tall before the darkness, not with fear, but with dignity. Because truth, he believed, is not always warm, but it is sacred. Yes, intelligence can isolate, but it also opens a hidden world, one rich with truth, with art, with beauty, and with a connection far deeper than casual conversation or fleeting approval. This, Schopenhauer argued, was a higher kind of belonging, one no crowd can offer, and no rejection can ever truly take away. Loneliness is usually seen as a sign of failure in social life. But what if sometimes it's the cost of deeper awareness? What if solitude isn't always a wound but a threshold? Modern psychology is beginning to confirm what thinkers like Schopenhauer sensed long before MRI scans and academic journals. High intelligence and deep thinking often come hand in hand with high isolation. It's not a flaw, it's a pattern. Let's take a look at the science. A fascinating 2016 study published in the British Journal of Psychology revealed something unexpected. The more intelligent a person is, the less satisfaction they report from frequent social interaction. Most people find happiness in the presence of friends and the rhythm of social gatherings. But for those with especially high intelligence, too much socializing leads to something else entirely: frustration, mental exhaustion, and a strange kind of emotional hollowness. Wait, because these minds don't crave noise. They crave meaning. Surface-level chatter feels empty. Repetition feels suffocating. Gossip and emotional theatrics feel like sandpaper on their inner world. These individuals might genuinely care about others, but they struggle to connect through the socially acceptable templates of small talk or shallow bonding. It's not that they can't connect. It's that the available forms of connection don't speak their language. This creates what psychologists call cognitive loneliness. It's not just about being alone physically. It's about being surrounded by people yet feeling unseen. It's the ache of watching the world talk around you while your thoughts echo in a different key. And here begins the emotional paradox. On one side, highly intelligent people tend to be introspective, natural observers of the human condition. They spend much of their lives in their heads building silent constellations of thought, insight, and analysis that often go unshared. On the other side, they are still human. They still long to be known, not just acknowledged, but understood. To be mirrored, to be met, to be held not with hands, but with comprehension. This is the trap. The more deeply you think, the harder it is to find someone who truly understands your loneliness. And this isn't arrogance, it's neuroscience. Dr. Thomas Suddendorf, a cognitive evolution specialist, explains that our brains evolved in tightly knit tribes of around 100 to 150 people. Intelligence wasn't designed for existential questions. It was built for survival, harmony, and social cohesion. But high IQ individuals in the modern world, they're evolutionary outliers. Their minds move faster, think abstractly, and challenge the rules. They aren't wired to simply fit in, and the world in return doesn't know what to do with them. This misalignment creates emotional friction, not because something's wrong with them, but because too much is happening inside them. Think of it this way. Imagine having 10 thoughts for every one that others have. Imagine noticing every twitch of a smile, every shift in tone. Imagine replaying a single offhand comment for hours, dissecting it from all angles. This kind of mental sensitivity isn't glamorous. It's exhausting. It can lead to anxiety, burnout, and depression, not due to weakness, but because the environment isn't built to accommodate such intense inner lives. A Harvard study even found that gifted children report greater levels of alienation and existential concern. From early on, they sense they are different, but instead of being nurtured, that difference is often dismissed or punished. You think too much. Why can't you just relax? Stop asking so many questions. And so they begin to internalize the message. Something must be wrong with me. They learn to withhold, to withdraw, to camouflage their depth. They still want to share, but they've been shut down too often. They still want to connect, but they've learned it's safer not to. Eventually, they build emotional walls, not to isolate, but to protect. And they wait silently, hoping someone might see through the silence. But most don't. Even in love, this pattern repeats. Highly intelligent individuals often feel unseen, not in the superficial sense, but in the soul-deep way. They may appear distant, guarded, or hard to read, but in truth, they are simply protecting something fragile, something that's been mishandled too many times. It's not that they don't want to be loved. They do. But they've discovered that most people love the idea of intelligence, not the tangled emotional complexity that comes with it. Psychologist Kazimierz Dabrowski called this phenomenon overexcitability, a heightened sensitivity across 5 domains: intellectual, emotional, imaginative, sensory, and psychomotor. In simpler terms, smart people feel more, think more, and inevitably suffer more. This intensity fuels their creativity, their vision, their ability to see the world with unusual clarity. But it also alienates them. It deepens the gap between them and a world that often operates on a simpler frequency. Yet here's a truth hidden in plain sight. Loneliness doesn't always mean something is missing. Sometimes it means something is unmatched. A mind that sees through illusion, a heart that refuses to settle for the superficial, a soul that chooses meaning over comfort. Such a person will always feel a little outside the circle, not because they have failed at life, but because they are built for something deeper, rarer. So if you've ever felt this kind of solitude, not just the absence of people, but the absence of resonance, perhaps it's not a curse. Perhaps it's the quiet confirmation that you are among the few who are not merely alive, but awake. But as we saw earlier, intelligence doesn't just illuminate, it exposes. It stirs not only admiration, but also something much darker: discomfort, envy, and even rejection. At first glance, intelligence seems like a gift everyone should celebrate. And initially, it often is admired. But that admiration can be fleeting. Beneath it, envy quietly festers. And envy is a strange emotion. It rarely announces itself. Instead, it disguises itself as criticism, sarcasm, or distance. One moment you're respected, the next you're quietly resented. Wishbowing. Because intelligence doesn't just bring light, it casts shadows. It reveals what others have spent years trying to hide, sometimes even from themselves, their own inadequacy. You speak with clarity, confidence, depth. But to some, you're not just speaking, you're exposing. They don't really hear your words. They hear the silent echo of their own insecurity. Your presence doesn't belittle them yet, they feel small. Your insight doesn't judge them yet, they feel exposed. The ego flinches and it retaliates. This is where the Dunning-Kruger effect creeps in, subtle but powerful. Named after psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger, this cognitive bias explains how people with limited knowledge often overestimate their abilities. Why? Because they simply don't know what they don't know. They lack the very tools to recognize their own ignorance. Now imagine placing someone genuinely intelligent in that same environment. Suddenly, the illusion of competence collapses. The room that once echoed with false certainty now feels cold and inadequate. And for many, instead of confronting that discomfort, they turn against its source. They brand the intelligent one as arrogant, distant, odd. They think they're better than us. But here's the irony: they never said that. It was never spoken aloud. The ego whispered it, fabricated it, because deep intelligence doesn't just challenge ideas, it shakes identities. And identities, like tribal ties, are fragile. In ancient times, to challenge the group meant risking exile, even death. We evolved in tightly knit social groups where conformity was survival. So anyone who thought differently, who questioned the norm, became a threat. Even today, those old instincts remain. So when someone with a sharp mind questions the consensus or disrupts the comfortable lie everyone shares, they become dangerous, not because of violence, but because of truth. Truth is disruptive. It doesn't just rearrange opinions. It forces people to look inward, and that's terrifying. This pattern has repeated itself throughout history. Socrates, one of the greatest minds of all time, was sentenced to death. Officially, he was accused of corrupting the youth. But in truth, he simply asked questions the powerful didn't want to answer. He poked holes in their illusions. Galileo dared to suggest that Earth revolved around the sun. He was placed under house arrest, not because science was offended, but because the church's power structure trembled. Nikola Tesla died alone, destitute, while others profited from his visions. Alan Turing, the genius who helped end World War II, was chemically castrated for his sexuality and ultimately died by suicide. These are not tales of simple misunderstandings. These are tragedies born from egoic defense society lashing out when its illusions were challenged. Because when someone introduces a deeper truth, they simultaneously expose the shallowness others have clung to. And very few are willing to rebuild themselves from scratch. So what do they do instead? They reject the truth bringer. They silence them. Not always with violence, but with dismissal, mockery, or isolation. And this dynamic is far from ancient history. Today it plays out quietly in offices, classrooms, families, and friendships. Those who think deeply, speak honestly, or refuse to conform are often left on the outside. They are shadow banned not just by algorithms, but by social norms. In meetings, they're overlooked. In classrooms, called disruptive. In relationships, told they're too much. Why? Because intelligence, when it doesn't come packaged with obedience, rattles the status quo. It exposes mediocrity. It asks more from people than they're willing to give. And in a world obsessed with comfort and illusion, that's unforgivable. So envy simmers. The ego pulls the trigger. But here lies the great paradox. People say they want intelligence. They quote philosophers on Instagram. They share clips of visionaries on YouTube. But sit them across from someone who sees through facades, who speaks with piercing honesty, and suddenly they recoil. Because what they really want is intelligence that flatters, not one that challenges. They want depth that entertains, not one that reveals. So if you've ever been rejected, not for your flaws, but for your insight, understand this. It's not because you were wrong. It's because your presence stirred something others weren't ready to face. And in a world driven by ego, that kind of presence is more threatening than cruelty. It's not evil they fear, it's awakening. So what do you do then? When the very thing that makes you special and also makes you solitary, when your mind ventures into depths that others don't even acknowledge, but no one around you seems to follow or even care. Arthur Schopenhauer didn't sugarcoat this dilemma. He didn't offer comforting lies. No false promises of just be yourself and you'll find your people. Instead, he delivered a brutally honest but deeply freeing truth solitude. He wrote that intellectual superiority naturally inclines towards solitude, not as punishment, but as liberation. Because the deeper your thoughts, the harder they are to share. The more refined your vision, the lonelier your gaze. And in a world terrified of silence, solitude is mistaken for weakness. People chase distractions, likes, comments, constant validation. They fear being alone, so they fill every gap with noise. But Schopenhauer turned this idea on its head. To him, the ability to be alone and to feel whole in that aloneness is the highest form of strength. Because solitude is not the same as loneliness. Loneliness is a craving for connection that never arrives. Solitude is a choice for peace over noise, for meaning over popularity. It's not the absence of others, it's the presence of yourself. Schopenhauer believed that deep thinkers pull away not because they hate humanity, but because they are drained by its surface-level chatter. To him, ordinary minds ticked like clocks, predictable, repetitive, mechanical. But a noble intellect, he said, was like a compass, forever seeking depth, direction, and truth. And you cannot follow that compass in a room full of noise. So what does solitude offer that society never will? Freedom, not just the freedom to move, but the freedom to think uninterrupted, to feel without judgment, to create without compromise. The great works of philosophy, science, and art, these were not forged in crowded halls. They were born in stillness, in long walks, in quiet rooms, in minds unafraid to be alone. Schopenhauer lived most of his life in reflection. He was not famous in his time, not celebrated, but he understood something timeless. A man can only be fully himself when he is alone. And if he does not learn to love solitude, he will never truly taste freedom. And so, as we explored in the last chapter, true freedom often begins the moment we find ourselves alone, stripped of the need to belong, released from the pressure to conform. Now we arrive at the core of Schopenhauer's brilliance. Here is where his philosophy stops being just an idea and becomes power. Because when you no longer seek validation, you become untouchable. Rejection loses its sting. It no longer cuts because it no longer defines you. You stop twisting yourself into shapes that fit someone else's mold. You stop shrinking your voice, your ideas, your presence, just to make other people comfortable. And that space you once feared, that silence, that solitude, it transforms. It becomes a sanctuary, a forge where strength is tempered, a mirror where truth can finally be seen. This is the raw, almost brutal beauty of Schopenhauer's solution. Don't chase acceptance. Don't beg society to understand your depth. Let it misunderstand you. Let it turn away. Because that rejection, it's not proof of your failure. It's confirmation of your difference. And difference in a world addicted to sameness is threatening. The world doesn't ignore deep thinkers because they're wrong. It ignores them because they disturb the comfort of what's familiar. They shake the illusions we cling to. They ask questions most would rather avoid. So if you've ever been labeled too much, too intense, too thoughtful, too emotional, too analytical, Schopenhauer would tell you, good. It means you've escaped the prison of the herd. It means you're not bending yourself to fit into places you don't belong. But solitude isn't just about escaping the noise. It's about reclaiming what is yours. Your time, your energy, your mind. It's about no longer performing and finally simply being not who the world expects, but who you truly are. And then something extraordinary begins to happen. As the silence deepens, you begin to see what others miss. You notice beauty in quiet moments, patterns in case, meaning in pain. You no longer try to belong. You start to become. This is what Schopenhauer meant by the noble intellect, a soul not made noble by status or birth, but by inner richness. And this path isn't for everyone. In fact, most people will never walk it, because solitude requires the one thing that frightens most, facing yourself. But if you are brave enough to walk through that silence, to sit with the weight of your thoughts, to resist the temptation to dilute yourself just to blend in, then solitude stops being emptiness. It becomes power, not the kind of power that dominates, but the kind that liberates, the kind that makes you real. So don't fear the loneliness that often comes with intelligence. Let it work on you. Let it shape you, deepen you, stretch you. Let it set you free. If you've ever felt out of place, like your thoughts are too heavy for casual conversations, like your questions reach deeper than people are willing to go, if your emotions feel too intense for a world that prefers numbness, you are not broken. You are not too much. You are simply more awake. And that awareness, it comes with a price. Misunderstanding, isolation, rejection. But what no one tells you is that the pain you feel, it isn't a weakness. It's a signal. A sign that you see what others don't, that you feel what others won't, that your mind wanders into places most people are too afraid to explore. And often that difference, your insight, your clarity, is exactly what makes others uncomfortable. So they turn away, not because you are wrong, but because you remind them of truths they're trying to avoid in themselves. This is the hidden wisdom Schopenhauer tapped into. The secret isn't to fix yourself to fit in. It's to understand yourself so you stop needing to. The journey of a thinking soul is never straight. It moves from confusion. Why don't I fit into realization? Maybe I wasn't meant to, and finally to quiet strength, I no longer need to. And somewhere along that path, the loneliness that once wounded you transforms. It becomes a mirror, one that reflects your truth, your vision, your vast inner world. Schopenhauer wrote, "Great men are like eagles. They build their nests on some lofty solitude, not because they are arrogant, but because they need the silence to see clearly. Because from up there, you are no longer drowning in the noise. You are above it. You see the bigger picture. So if society rejects you, let it. That rejection is not a failure, it's validation. It's proof that you think with honesty, feel with depth, and refuse to trade your authenticity for cheap approval. That is your evidence. You're not lost. You're just ahead of your time. And in time, maybe others will catch up. Or maybe they won't, but by then you won't be waiting. You'll already be free. If you've made it this far into the video, you're not just watching, you're searching for truth, for meaning, for something that feels real in a world full of masks. And that already sets you apart. Maybe you've always felt different, like your thoughts were heavier, like your heart carried more than others could see. Maybe the world made you question whether that was a flaw. It's not. It's clarity. And clarity often walks alone. Schopenhauer believed that the clearest minds often follow the loneliest roads. But those roads, though empty, lead to freedom. Here at Cyphus, this space exists for minds like yours. Minds that think deeply, feel fully, and never settle for shallow answers. So if this resonated with you, subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've felt this kind of isolation, tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. Let's keep building a community of minds that never quite fit in, because we were never meant to.